In October of this year, I was invited to come across to the Kingdom of Bhutan to speak at the 4th International Vajrayana Conference that was held there in the capital city of Thimphu. So I presented a talk on the nature of Alchemy Nadan to a lot of practitioners of Vajrayana Buddhism. And this is the presentation that I gave on that day. But the problem is we were going to share it publicly, but the sound quality was actually very, very bad. So what I've done is I've put into this video the slides that I used in that presentation, and then I've re-recorded the talk. And it's actually a little bit better because it gives me a chance to go into more detail because I'm not under time pressures like I was at the conference. And also I can cut out some of the jokes which had to be toned down a little bit because I was talking to an audience of monks as opposed to the people I usually talk to. So the aim of this talk is not fully to discuss the similarities between Tummo and the firing process of Taoist Nadan, nor is it really to fully discuss the differences either. It might sound like a strange start to a talk with a title such as this, but really what I want to do is discuss alchemy in detail, especially the firing process, the start of the Nadan process, and look at it in the context of what it does. Now, the reason I'm doing this, and I'm looking at the alchemical process and the firing process in detail like this, is to allow the person listening to this talk to draw their own conclusions as to the similarities or the differences between Tummo. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because whilst I have a fairly good idea about Tummo, I've seen different versions of it and tried different versions of it. I tried versions of Tummo that are using a very visualization-based method to generate the inner heat that the system is very famous for. And I've also practiced more physical versions of Tummo using compressions and very specific ways of breathing and sometimes locks in the body and various other methods. So I know that Tummo can take very many different forms, but what I would like to do is talk about Nadan, and perhaps the person who is familiar with Tummo can start to maybe draw some parallels for themselves and maybe see their own differences between alchemy and Tummo. So Tummo, as a practice, just to make sure we're all on the same page, it's a practice that sometimes in modern times they talk about it being for inner heat, and that's kind of what it's focused upon, as if that's the most important thing. You know, I've even seen contemporary writers or teachers talk about Tummo as if it's only to keep people warm because the Himalayan areas are cold and things like this, and the idea is you build this heat, and sometimes people take it further and say that this heat that you build in Tummo is for the body, for its health and physiological change, which is partially true. But actually, if we look at the kind of deeper meaning of Tummo, which is actually translated as kind of the energy of a fierce woman, a sort of fierce feminine fire that blazes through the body, is the idea, this inner heat process, is that it's actually to burn through blockages within the subtle body, within the channel system, within tantric methods, to lead towards all kinds of things. I mean, it's the first of the 6 dharmas of Naropa, which are a set of 6 stages which incrementally move someone through to subtler and subtler levels of practice. Some teachers will say they're fully sequential, the 6 dharmas of Naropa, and then I know other teachers, actually within the Vajrayana tradition, will talk about them being like a cycle, a wheel that all must be practiced together. But however you view them, linear or circular, it's easy to see that Tummo is the most dense, the most physical, the most body-based level of the practice of these 6 dharmas or these 6 yogas of Naropa. Now, the reason that they start with the physical body is the idea is that the body must be prepared for all of the spiritual or higher work that is to come afterwards, okay, using the channels on the nadi systems. It also incorporates this idea of working with the winds, the lung or the vayu sometimes within the body, and then also to start talking about these drops that can activate the sense of bliss as it moves through the body. It also uses this heat to move into the central channel of the system, to burn it open, to create space within the body, and to enable the mind to access the subtler realms of yogic practice, tantric practice. So with that introduction to Tummo, what I'm going to do is focus on the alchemy process within this talk. This is going to be the emphasis of what I'm doing. So now to give a little introduction to Nei Dan. Nei Dan is translated as the internal elixir. Dan is the elixir, a substance that is captured or developed or cultivated within the body, which is seen as an internalized version of the external pill that alchemists would have developed in the past. So for that reason, Nei Dan is also known as inner alchemy. Not a direct translation, but definitely a discussion or a sort of conceptual idea of what they're doing. They're internalizing what was an external alchemy process to develop this elixir within the body. So Nei Dan is commonly associated with Daoism, and different traditions have different takes upon it. And the version I'll be talking about is very much linked to the Dragon Gate sect or Chuanzhen practice, rather than some of the more magical or religious versions of alchemy that also exist. I'll be talking about the very physical and non-religious version of alchemy of Nei Dan. So Nei Dan, like the 6 yogas of Naropa, if you like, is really, as a system, is divided into stages, which again, some people say are sequential. Me personally, I tend to think the early stages need to be sequential and then the later stages can be a bit more cyclical. But other people will disagree and say it's cyclical from the beginning. But these stages are, once again, they have denser stages such as the firing process, and then they have more subtle stages working through the channel system and the subtle bodies through to development of working with the Shen or with consciousness. So for this lecture, I'm going to focus very much on the firing process, which even from the name, firing process, already suggests maybe a somatic similarity, an experiential similarity or parallel to what happens when somebody is going through Tummo practice, because obviously with the name fire, a firing process, it's talking about heat. Firing process is not within all versions of alchemy, but certainly within the Nei Dan I was taught, it's a major foundational stage of the practice. And the idea of the firing process is that it does the same thing. Essentially, we learn how to build and develop a kind of internal heat within the body that is cultivated as if we are sort of an external alchemist concocting some kind of formula, but what we're actually doing is we're building heat in the body, and then we're sending that heat through the channel system in a very specific fashion. Now, before I go any further, I want to make clear that I'm not personally pro the combining of methods, nor am I usually pro drawing parallels between systems. So as a kind of cop-out, in order to avoid that, I'm only going to be talking about firing process rather than Tummo, but obviously you can understand the underlying ethos is that my idea is actually there are some crossovers. Certainly historically, there has been sharing between the traditions. I mean, alchemy is known as and sort of 8th century is when the first time we get writings about alchemy, so it's normally dated to that age, but you can't really, I don't really think you can trust historical ages of practices, because remember, what you're not seeing is when was a practice developed. What you're seeing is when a practice was written down or recorded, which is not quite the same thing. Okay, there might have been practice for a long time prior to that. So sometimes when people are trying to line up alchemy and Nei Dan and Tummo, or maybe even some Hindu practice or yoga practice, and they're trying to figure out, do they have the same origin? They use the dates to decide this, but I don't really think you can do this because, as I said, the dates are really developed from when something is written down, so I don't think they're the most reliable when they're that far back, definitely not. And also texts get lost, definitely. The amount of books that have been destroyed in the past, as well as lineages and traditions, means that history is quite difficult to pin down and do accurately, I think. But there's definitely been, in my opinion, some sharing, some ideas have crossed over and they've discussed things, and I wouldn't be surprised if these things were from a common root. But of course, within any practice, once it hits a different tradition or a different culture, it absorbs and takes on some of that cultural identity to create a change, okay, so that therefore the practice can adjust. But despite this, despite me saying that there is a shared link or a shared root, I also don't believe that people should practice multiple methods in order to get a hang of the result really, because I think that sometimes methods can clash. And to me, sometimes Tummo, especially some of the more physical based methods of Tummo, can be a little bit stimulating. Obviously, that's kind of the aim of it, right? I mean, it's named a sort of savage or wild feminine fire. The name implies something a bit extreme, doesn't it, or quite strong. And then the firing process, or sometimes called the burning process of alchemy, is also a very stimulating and strong process. And they're not quite, the actual mechanics and methodology, the way they develop these fires is a little different between the traditions. So therefore, if somebody is practicing both, it can actually be a little bit too strong. So for that reason, what I'm saying is that this discussion is purely intellectual and for interest's sake as much as anything. But I would advise that if somebody has a very effective and efficient version of Tummo, or somebody has a very efficient and effective version of the firing process in Nei Dan, then one or the other is good enough. It is adequate, and it is probably safer to just do that one method. But I will say that it's quite hard to find authentic Tummo, to be perfectly honest, and it's also quite hard to find authentic inner alchemy, and definitely the firing process is still a lot more hidden than people might think. So with these two diagrams, we can see the processes that I've been talking about. On the left, you'll see a mural from Lukang Temple, which shows various stages of the 6 yogas of Naropa, the 6 dharmas of Naropa. Especially on the bottom left, if you can see closely on the diagram, you have a guy practicing the inner heat practice of Tummo. There's fire being generated going up through the central channel. For sure, and then on the top of his head you can see something escaping, and that's a demonstration of the Pawa practice about liberation of the consciousness from the form of the body. On the right, you can see a carving from Baiyongguan White Cloud Temple, which is in Beijing. And this is a chart called the Neijing 2. It's very, very famous amongst alchemy practitioners. I've done a couple of lengthier talks on this chart in the past because of its importance. It's dated to 1886, although that's when the carving was put onto the wall in White Cloud Temple. There's a long history to this chart where this diagram was copied by alchemical practitioners, copied out by hand. So obviously it was a scroll or paper version for a long time until eventually it was carved onto the wall in the White Cloud Temple. So in a similar way, both of these murals or carving, in the case of the one on the right from the temple wall, are showing processes that the body will go through, starting with a very dense, shall we say, physical, manifest body level practice, going through to something more ethereal, something more subtle, through to the channel system, through into work directly with the elevation of consciousness. Okay, so they have this kind of gradation from dense through to subtle, which is especially easy to see on the right on the White Cloud Temple diagram, the Neijing 2, the inner practice chart, because it's actually getting more subtle as it goes up the diagram towards the top. So the bottom of the chart is the most dense, which also represents where we work in the body, very low down in the body when we're developing this heat or cultivating the chi, and then it becomes more subtle as it moves up through this diagram that's depicting the body much like a mountain top or cliff face. So with regards to Tummo versus the firing process, I already said I wouldn't draw a lot of comparisons myself, but I do want to draw upon 2, I would say, major factors for the alchemical process for Nei Dan that I would say actually differs it quite greatly from a lot of the Tummo practices. So the first of these is that it's not religious. So if you're not familiar with Tummo, these days you get many contemporary versions of it, including sort of very simplified and stripped down versions. For example, the Wim Hof method would sometimes tenuously be considered at least Tummo-like with regards to what it's doing. But if you go back to sort of Tummo, especially with regards to the version shown on this chart, it's a very religious practice. There's a lot of incorporation of beliefs of Tantric Buddhism, sometimes a lot of visualization of deities and sacred syllables and things like this that connect it very much to the wider religion of Buddhism. I think sometimes people will say Buddhism is not a religion. I don't think we can really apply that to Vajrayana quite so well. I think that it's very clear that that is a religious practice to me. So alchemy is a little different, in that it's divorced from religion. Now, some people disagree because there are versions of alchemy that actually talk about deities or gods living in the body, and there's certain charts that depict that. But I would argue that that is a version of alchemy coming from a slightly different line than the version I'm talking about. Because, for example, some traditions, such as Zhengyi and things like this, with the Taoism, will have more of a leaning towards that kind of the side of the tradition, but very much what I would consider Dragon Gate, Northern Sect, Chuanzhen, alchemical training, doesn't really talk about religion very much. The deities and the gods are really not very important. What's important is the process that you can work through within your own body. So you're working with the substances within your own system, especially at the beginning when you're looking with the firing process, and no outside help is sought, and no attempt to align with either an external or an internal deity. This brings me to the second key quality for the firing process, which actually I know a lot of Taoist practitioners are going to disagree with me on this, but I will state my case because that's all I can do, is that the firing process aspect of Nei Dan should not include any visualization or imagination. That has been made very, very clear to me by the alchemical practitioners that I worked with, that visualization or imagination has no part in traditional alchemy. Now, I know that a lot of people in the West will have encountered versions of alchemy or Nei Dan that do include visualizations. For example, visualizing a fire in the abdomen, visualizing the color red in the heart, visualizing the color green in the liver, or whatever, you know, especially fire and water mixing might be red at the top and blue at the bottom and cycling around in the body, and all these kinds of things, or sometimes picturing trigrams in the body. But to me, all of these are contemporary adjustments of the alchemy process. They are a modernization of that process, and not really accurate, because the key quality for alchemy is that if anything does arise visually, it arises from inside you naturally. You do not generate it with your mind. Alchemy is in line with the Taoist view that the key quality is release with regards to your consciousness. So later on we'll discuss the correct quality of mind for alchemical practice, and you'll see that it does not include imagination or visualization. Now, most of the alchemy that people will encounter in the West is using visualization or imagination, but to me that is an error and that is a modernization. I wouldn't really count that as Nei Dan, to be honest. I would say that is a modern fabrication that's maybe based upon traditional alchemical concepts. As we go through this talk, I will discuss the processes involved in actually initiating the firing process, and hopefully you'll see that visualization or imagination do not come into it, not at all. We are using the body in order to develop the heat that we're using. This heat is developed from a combination of gathering agents within the system, gathering the ingredients to initiate the firing process, along with a series of compressions and ways of using the breath in order to move the body through the Nei Dan. It's clearly stated many times actually by many practitioners in different traditions, whether it be alchemical traditions or yogic traditions, that the process that we're going through with regards to our spiritual evolution must either begin in the body, or sometimes they will say it entirely takes place within the body. Okay? So the whole path is to be found within you, within your form, within your body. Now, with regards to alchemy, this is especially true at the beginning, that the firing process is initiated through the use of the physical body and physical mechanical techniques. It is not a mental process at the beginning. Now, saying that to counter myself, argue with myself if you like, your mind does also need to be in the correct state for the practice to work, and we'll look at what that is later, but that the mind is not the key factor. We are simply ensuring, by putting the mind into the right state, a more meditative state, that we are not getting in the way of the process that we are doing with our body. So it is a somatic process based upon very clear, tangible results, and this is going to give us access to the transformational process. While we're working with the denser level of our body, okay, denser level of our form, the denser energies within the body, we can use very, very physical techniques, essentially to draw all of the energies or the chi that we require into the abdominal cavity, into what they call the cauldron, which we'll come to later, and then to ignite that chi within that space low down in the body, using a combination of the perineal region and the abdominal region to generate that fire or that heat that's going to move through our system. Now, the other reason that it's a somatic process is because one of the rules of Taoism is that if something happens on one level, it also happens on another. So what do I mean by that? If something happens to your body, it's also going to affect the qi, it's also going to affect the mind. If something happens in your mind, it's also going to affect the qi, it's going to affect the body. It's like one is a reflection or a shadow of the other. So it doesn't really matter what level we are tuning into or our awareness is paying attention to, if you like. It's paying attention to one of these different levels that are all being affected at the same time. So there comes arguments within alchemy and Taoism, especially with regards to qi. I've seen people say that qi is moves within the subtle channels of the body, very similar to the nadis of Tummo practice. So within the Jing law system of Chinese arts, they'll say these are subtle pathways, and practitioners have even described them as lines of light, sometimes up to half a thumb's thickness through the body, and when they have this sort of inner perception, not imagined but perceived, at these subtle levels. And then other people will say, no, qi is just, it moves in your nerves, in your nervous system. It's a very physical thing. It was an old model for something that is actually really tangible and very, very physical. Now, to myself, and certainly to the alchemy practitioners that I've trained with, both of these things are true. Because if qi moves within the subtle channel system, there is also a reflected movement of energy within the nervous system and vice versa. So at the beginning, when we're using sensation to give us feedback, because we need some kind of feedback to our process, right? Perhaps feedback later on in the process is much easier because maybe there's a transformation to our body, a transformation to our consciousness. Maybe siddhi or abilities arise or anything like this. Maybe there are visual phenomena that show us where we are. Lots of these things can come later. But at the beginning, what we are left with is what we can feel, what we can tangibly connect to, the somatic experience of our work. Now, in the early stages, can you feel your subtle channels? Probably not. Some people can, but they are definitely exceptions to the norm. Most people cannot feel their subtle channel system. They cannot feel their central channel. They cannot feel these pathways of light and yin and yang energy that moves through the system. But what they can feel is their nerves. They can feel when something is warm or hot or cold or tingly or moving or something like this in the system. And essentially what you are feeling is your nerves, because if you feel something in the standard sense, you are feeling it through your nerves. Even if you feel something large and energetic moving through your body, if you can feel it tangibly, then the feeling aspect of it is in your nervous system, even if that's just a reflection of what is happening on a more subtle level in the body. So we take that process within Nei Dan, firing process, and on the dense level, we could really say that the dense level of practice is the level of working with the energy that moves through the nervous system. But do not make the mistake of thinking that just because I'm saying it's a nervous system, it's not also moving in a subtle body, because it is. But what happens is when I work on the level of the qi within the nerves, the energy moving through the nervous system, work with a sense of feeling and different sensations through the firing process, then gradually that will guide my mind through to subtler levels of practice until I encounter the channels, I encounter the subtle body. And then your awareness is able to transfer from the dense body across to the subtle body. And it's a very natural transition that I don't need to force. I don't need to visualize those channels. I simply go with the somatic experience of my practice and allow my mind to be guided across to the subtler realm when I'm good and ready. So here, the two diagrams you have, well actually it's one diagram, and the one on the right is a cutaway of it. This is a Shogun 2 chart. The Shogun 2 chart is translated as the chart of cultivating perception. There's various ways to translate it, but that's probably one of the most common ways, the chart of cultivating perfection. What it shows is a map of the human body. That's it's a lot clearer to see that it's human body than the Nei Dan 2, right? You can actually see it's got a head, it's got legs, it's a person sat in a lotus position, isn't it? And what you have is all kinds of depictions and symbols and writings around the body. One of the major things is a discussion of the organs and the channels and things like this within the system. And what it's showing us, the Shogun 2, is the connection between the quality and the health of the body and cultivation. So there's a lot of teachings in here, a lot of writings on this chart that I don't really have time to go into, that actually talk about Chinese medical principles, but at the same time it also includes a lot of cosmological or esoteric principles, especially with regards to how the essence moves into the body and things like this. So it's a little bit divorced from Chinese medicine. A little bit of confusion has arisen from this chart, in my opinion. I think this chart is to blame for a few errors because it has some connections to Chinese medicine and some Chinese medicine principles there. I think sometimes the people have kind of overly overlaid the principles of Chinese medicine into alchemy. So they've thought that all of those things you learn in TCM or other Chinese medical system apply to alchemy. So they think that the cultivation of the body is about making sure that the lung function is okay and the kidney function is okay and things like this. But to me, that's not actually the case, not really. They're simply depicting within this chart, amongst other things, they're showing some of the different energies within the body and how they interact, but they're also showing that the body must be ready for this practice, it must be ready for alchemy and Nei Dan. So therefore it must be harmonized and fairly balanced. If somebody is very, very unhealthy, has a lot of blockages in the system, disharmonies in the organs, deficiencies, excesses, or anything like this, as we would understand it from a Chinese medical point of view, it means they are not really ready for alchemy practice. Those things need to be harmonized or regulated first. Only after that process is gone through and somebody is ready, then they're able to practice the firing process safely. And I would argue that that probably applies to Tummo as well. I don't see that as something that people should begin with. I think there should be preparatory work before they enter into anything to do with developing fire or heat in the body. When we look at the different types of fire, there's 3 different types in alchemy, we'll see why that's the case. So the cutaway that I've shown you on the right here with a little man depicted in black, and he's holding up a water trigram because it's in the lower abdominal space, and the water trigram is very important for alchemy, that it's in the abdominal space. And underneath you see a red circle, and the red circle, sometimes people think that's the Dan elixir, and arguably that's the case. I'm not so sure. I think sometimes it's because that red circle can also in older charts depict the place of the essence as well, but you could use it to depict either if you want. It doesn't really matter. It's okay. What's more important is underneath is you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah, you've got 9. In that fan, you've got 9 yellow circles with 9 sets of Chinese writing underneath, which show the 9 layers of hell connected to the lower regions of the body. Now, I wanted to highlight that because it's quite interesting. I think the Shogun 2 chart is an interesting one because it starts to incorporate different beliefs between different Taoist traditions, because although it's a chart that is used by the Chuanzhen practitioners, and definitely when I have trained with Chuanzhen or Longmenpai practitioners, this chart has been quite important. The reason that it's quite an interesting one is because it also includes influences from other traditions, including the Zhang Yi sect and things like this. So these sort of realms of hell, quite an important carryover from other traditions, but they're not something that really we focus upon, particularly within the firing process that I work on. Okay. Just out of interest, the water trigram that you see held up by the man depicted in black, the little demon is actually. But the water trigram is 2 broken lines with a solid line in the middle. So you've got yin, yang, yin, 2 yin lines with a yang line. And the reason that symbol is very, very important is because ultimately it's a yin symbol, but it shows you at the center of that yin there is a potential for yang. There's a spark that can be drawn out of that symbol. Okay, that yang line can be extracted. That's an important part of the alchemical process. And that yang line that we're extracting is the initiator for the heat. It's showing us right at the beginning. This is the spark we use to initiate the firing process. So really, if we think about it like that, we can understand that there's 2 processes involved in initiating the firing process. Number 1, we have to gather the qi to form that trigram if you want the potential for water energy. And the second one is then we need to extract yang from it, that central line. And that is very, very important for initiating the firing process. So here on the left we have the lower section of the Neijing 2, showing 2 farmers working some water wheels, and you see there's water at the base of the body, and then as you go up there's 4 yin-yang symbols that are set on fire, and then water that is either running up or running down. People will have disagreements on which direction the water is flowing. To me it doesn't matter. and that's on the right-hand side. The water is either flowing up or flowing down. Honestly, the arguments I've had with people where they get very, very heated about which direction the water is going, it's almost irrelevant, because in actual fact, the water, if you like, as we'll see later, is going to flow both directions at different times. It's going to go up the body, and it's also going to come down the body. So in that case, I'm a little bit of a fence sitter. Whatever people prefer, your direction of flow is just fine. So on the right, we have the ding and the lu, as they're commonly depicted in alchemy texts. I've recreated it here on a computer paint program, but they're recreated from very old ways of drawing them. Okay. So on the left is the lu, or the furnace, shown as almost like a crescent moon laying on its back with 3 points above it. And then on the right, we have the ding, or the cauldron. Not like a witch's cauldron, more of an alchemist's cauldron, a place where they're cooking up their concoctions. Now you'll see that both have the number 3 involved. The lu has 3 circles above it, the furnace, implying that 3 things need to come together in order to generate the activation of the furnace. That's very important. There's always a trinity involved in every process in alchemy. And the right-hand symbol has 3 legs. Okay, the ding has 3 legs. The Chinese cauldron always has 3 legs. Again, showing different components coming together, 3 ingredients to initiate them. Now, the idea is basically that the cauldron later on is the whole body, but right now, at the beginning, with regard to the firing process, it's specifically talking about the abdominal region. Now, the furnace that sits underneath this cauldron, underneath the ding, is situated at the perineum and the lower region of the body. And a lot of our firing process is about filling the cauldron with chi, with energy, and then igniting that substance underneath it, igniting the furnace to cook or boil that energy that's been gathered inside the cauldron. So a very simple process: gather the chi inside the cauldron, ignite it by igniting the furnace, and this will start to cook or process the chi within the abdominal space. Going back to the Neijing 2 on the left, this is kind of depicted by the practitioners working with these wheels in order to generate heat, and then the water underneath and represents the essence that is an important part of the jing, that is an important part of the firing process. Now this is very, very important, because it is possible to initiate the firing process without filling the cauldron. Okay? But if you initiate the firing process without filling the cauldron, you're essentially going to burn up a fuel that is not there. Okay? I would argue that in some forms of Tummo, just like in some forms of alchemy, this can be the case. And this can cause problems for practitioners, because if you start to try to burn a fuel that isn't there, if you know anything about Chinese medicine, you'll know what's going to happen. You're going to burn the kidneys, create a little bit of adrenal burnout. You'll become what they call yin deficient, and it'll create a kind of empty heat, which is incorrect, that will move up through the body. Which in layman's terms, Chinese medicine people will have to excuse me for my horrible bastardization of Chinese medical theory at this point, but just in layman's terms, you could probably think of this as burnout, adrenal fatigue, and sort of hot flush type heat that moves up through the body, creating headaches and things like this, and insomnia and all kinds of symptoms, as well as sort of weakness of the bladder and sexual dysfunction and weakness of the lower back. So this would be what happens if we kind of burn a substance that's not there. We don't want to initiate the firing process until the cauldron is full. So in order to fill the cauldron, this is the stage of gathering chi in the abdominal cavity. Now arguably this isn't really Nei Dan, although it is, it's not. It depends how you define these terms, I suppose, and different teachers will define them different ways. But you could argue this is the Qigong or Neigong stage that comes prior to Nei Dan, the gathering of chi, the building of the dantian. Now within the abdomen, the dantian that we're talking about here, I'm not talking about the elixir, I'm talking about the chi that moves into the abdominal cavity. Okay, we fill it up with chi. Now we must remember that people do not have this. Maybe if you started very young, age 4, age 5, maybe you'd have this chi there already, nice and solid. But for most of us that have had a semi-interesting life, we've used up some of this chi, or used up some of this essence in the pursuit of living a life. So therefore we have to regather or reconsolidate that energy into the abdomen to take us back to a sort of youthful levels of energy storage, like filling a battery. And that battery that we fill up, that energy that we put into the abdominal cavity, becomes the fuel that is put into the cauldron, to put into the ding, and this is later what we're going to cook when we're going to ignite this substance. Now, without that substance, without that qi, if the dantian is not full, abdominal cavity is not full of energy, then not only can it, potentially cause problems, but even in a best case scenario, it's going to make your practice kind of weak. You're not going to expect to get good results from the body if the battery is not full. But the dantian is not automatically there. I've never met anyone in all my years of teaching where someone has a dantian who hasn't done some training to develop the dantian. It's not there. Sometimes people talk about it like it's a natural part of the body, like it's your arm or your leg or whatever, like it's there, but it's not. It almost needs installing, almost like a bit of software needs building into the body. So a lot of Qigong is focused on this, how to build this dantian at the beginning, how to bring this qi into the body to give us the fuel for the firing process. So, to depart a little from the firing process, you'll have to excuse me, I want to step back and look at the process of getting the body ready for it. Now, first of all, we need to understand that qi is divided into two types, yin qi and yang qi. Now, when I say yin and yang, a lot of people will jump to kind of comparative concepts, day and night, up and down, black and white, male and female, maybe, things like this, sort of polar opposites. And these are kind of the conceptual idea of yin and yang. But within alchemy or Neigong or Qigong, when we talk about yin and yang, with regards to qi, we're talking about two forms of energy. Okay? Specifically when we apply yin and yang to qi, this is yin qi, yang qi. Yin qi is experienced as a form of biomagnetism within the body, okay, that forms in fields, okay, like a sphere. Think of our magnetic field forms around a point. And then yang qi is a form of electricity that moves in a current through the nerves, okay, yin and yang qi. Now, in order to build the dantian, we need two things. We need a container, the outside of the cauldron or the outside of the ding, if you like, and then we need a substance to fill that container. Okay, this would be the fluid or the soup, if you want, whatever it is that's inside that cauldron cooking. So the container, the form, is yin, okay, and that is the yin qi. So what we have to learn to do through various methods, including breathing, postural work, various exercises, mental work, whatever you like, but not visualization and not imagination. They are not used, okay? Our mind is simply paying attention to the process that we go through with our exercises. It is not generating these things through visualization. What we do is we gather the yin qi until it starts to form into a sphere, a condensed sphere. A magnetic field is built inside the abdominal cavity. This becomes the container. Remember, one of the words associated with yin is to create form, okay? The form is the dantian, okay, the outside shell formed by the yin qi. Then we have a fairly lengthy process of filling that magnetic field, filling that sphere with yang qi. So we direct the electrical energy from the nervous system, we build more and more of it, and we direct it down into the abdominal cavity until it starts to fill the dantian up with energy. This is the yang qi. Yang qi is not form, it is action, it is life, it is the energy within the nerves, and we pull it all down into the dantian space. Now remember, just because something happens on the level of the nerves, it does not mean that it is only nerves. Definitely not. There is a more subtle level taking place in the background. There is a purely energetic manifestation of the dantian in the background. There's a purely energetic or subtle manifestation of the qi of the channels, but we are not worried about that too much because we're still on the firing process. We're on the denser part of our training. So we're trying to use the bodily energies of this biomagnetism and this bioelectricity to build it in the abdominal space. Now, one of the hallmarks of an authentic Qigong or Neigong system, or Nei Dan system in my opinion, is in the early stages, is that it does actually teach you to work with these two forces, with the magnetism and the electricity, to build them in the abdominal space. Where many modernized or stripped down systems, or systems that have lost something within their training, have actually kind of moved away from this idea, and they don't really develop the dantian, unfortunately. They kind of jump straight to moving exercises, or in the case of Nei Dan, trying to create fire, but they miss out this important process of filling the cauldron up. Now the three components that we can talk about, remember we have the Trinity, the three circles above the Lu on that diagram on the right, or the three legs of the Ding, are really the Yin Qi and the Yang Qi, which we've already discussed, and then the final thing would be the quality of your essence, the Jing, which is symbolized by the water at the bottom of the Neijing 2 chart, okay, that is depicted in the painting on the left. Now the essence, your Jing, has to be nice and strong. So a lot of people who know much about Qigong or TCM will know this is very closely related to the health of your kidneys and sometimes your sexual energy and things like this. That's a discussion for another time. But essentially, if that kidney energy or that essence or that Jing is not nice and strong, if it's not strong enough, it's not going to anchor the Yin and Yang Qi. It's like if the essence is weak, there's no anchor, so the Yin and the Yang Qi cannot descend, it cannot move to the abdomen. So a lot of the primary developmental processes for Nei Dan are getting the essence and the Jing nice and strong, as well as developing these Yin and Yang Qi to a high level to build this Dantian within the lower part of the body. Remember, this is the fuel. Now for a dedicated practitioner, you're looking at a few years to build that substance, to build that fuel within the body before we ignite it. Before we change slides, I just want to highlight once again that this is the key point of this part of the discussion, that in order for the firing process to work healthily and effectively and efficiently, we have to build the fuel because we have to have something to ignite. We don't just want to generate heat, we generate the heat to ignite the qi, to ignite that energy that's built within the cauldron. And if we don't have that substance there, we've got nothing to ignite. That's very, very important. So on the left of this slide, we have a diagram taken from the Xingming Guijie 17th century text that's very important to alchemy, that really means the principles of combining Xing and Ming, Xing being your nature and Ming being your life path or your health. Some people describe it as mind and body coming together, but we'll take it apart in a minute in a little bit more detail. So the chart talks about washing the heart to return to a hidden place. And it's a very important principle because essentially it's really looking at what we're doing with the mind. We're trying to calm the mind, to clean or wash the heart. In alchemy, heart and mind are often interchangeable. The word xin is not clear on whether we're talking about the physical heart or the mind. Okay, so we're washing the heart to return to a hidden place, which in the beginning and the early stages simply means to go to a place that is calmer and more centered. But we'll see now that it actually goes a little bit deeper than that because it's connected to this idea of burning the dust. So on the right, you'll see another one from the Lukang temple, a diagram of a yogi going through the firing process there. And he's doing quite well. There's a lot of heat coming off of his head, as you can see from the picture. So burning the dust essentially means to burn away some of the, let's go with the body level first. It means to burn away some of the impurities within the channel system. So they talk about the body and the channels being as if they fill with dirt or fill with dust. They block, and once they become blocked and obstructed, then qi cannot flow through them. So on something like Chinese medicine, an art like Chinese medicine would understand that if somebody's channel system is blocked by the dust, if we use the alchemical term, then they're more likely to become sick. There will be stagnation, a lack of flow, things will block, and then the body will become unhealthy. Now at the same time, this dust is also accumulating within the mind, within the heart as well. So dust is used as a kind of two-pronged term, because not only does it mean blockages in the channel, but it can also mean impurities or distortion in your mind, in your perception, layers of emotional build-up, layers of distortion on your mind, character traits built up from prior experiences, things that we might call the acquired mind, that is developed after you were born. This is the dust that builds up on the mirror of your mind, if you like. Now this becomes quite important for alchemy because in the same way that dust is used interchangeably to mean either the mind or blockages in the channels, the implication is that as I clear out the channels, I will also clear out the qualities of my mind. Or as I clear out the qualities of my mind, I will also clear out the dust within the channels. So in this way, the body will affect the mind or the mind will affect the body. Here we have one of the important rationales for the firing process, right? Because what we're learning to do is to ignite this fire within the base of the body, these different types of fire actually, and move them through the channel so they can burn the dust to free it up. Not only does that, warm the body and improve the body's functioning and health, that's true, it can increase chi flow, but as I burn this dust out of the channel system to free up the blockages, it also burns the dust off of the mind. So it starts to free up the consciousness from some of the accumulated debris of your acquired nature. So it leads you closer to a more meditative state. Now this diagram from the Xingming Guizhi, wash the heart to return to a hidden place, is really talking about the importance of also incorporating your mind into this as well. Because although we have the firing process, we're actually generating this fire to burn away the dust, we also want to hit the practice from the other direction. Xing and Ming can mean nature or mind, the mental practice, and Ming can mean body or physical practice. So the Ming part of this process would be to ignite the fire to burn the dust. The Xing or mind part of this process would be to wash the heart to return to a hidden place. Okay? And when the mind and the body come together through the firing process, then what will happen is you will burn this dust more effectively, free up the channels, and move the mind towards a more pure or congenital, they call it in Taoism, state, an original state. So by washing the heart, we return to a hidden place. Return is important because the implication is you're going back to a state of mind before you accumulated this debris, this dust. And the hidden place means a part within your consciousness that we call Tai Ding, meaning great stillness. Essentially very akin to the Buddhist term of Samadhi. Okay, they would be related to one another. Tai Ding, or the hidden place, is related to Samadhi, okay, this meditative quality. So this really brings forward one of the great importances for no visualization or imagination within the firing process of alchemy, at least. I know that's a little different in Tummo, but in alchemy we wouldn't do this. Because in order to wash the heart has to be free, or the mind has to be free rather, of any fabrications. Because any fabrication that it generates in the form of visualization or intention, with regards to trying to control something using the mind, is going to produce more dust, they would say. It would be impossible, according to the alchemy process, to return to a hidden place or to move towards the meditative state of Samadhi or Tai Ding while the heart was fabricating or generating imagery or imagination, because if it is doing these things, it is accumulating dust. To clean the heart, or to wash the heart, or wash the mind, we must train the mind to move towards an equanimous state of pure awareness, so that it is simply paying attention to the process that is unfolding within the body. So my Ming, or bodily based practice, is to initiate this fire to burn the dust, and the nature or mental aspect of my training is simply to pay attention. So the process is done physically, it is somatically experienced, and then the awareness simply pays attention to this somatic experience taking place within the vehicle of our body. This is how the firing process works. Within any of these practices, we have a simple rule that can be applied certainly within alchemical work, but it applies to other practices as well, that we have a cause, which is the practice, the physical practice, and then this leads to an effect, which in this case would be to initiate the fire and burn the dust. The cause leads to the effect. The practice initiates the fire. But in order for the cause to lead to the effect, the conditions must be correct. It's like the conditions are a middleman getting in the way. The condition in this case is our mind, is us. So in order for the conditions to be correct, we apply our attention or our awareness to the process. Now this is where the firing process is sustained in our practice, because I can initiate the firing process with a physical technique, but then once something is initiated, like the strike of a flame, we have to keep that flame burning. It's just like if you're lighting a fire. Sometimes if you're out and you're camping and you light a fire, it just goes out and you have to relight it several times, and it can be quite frustrating. And then eventually the fire will stay burning. And it's very similar with the firing process. In order to generate this fire, what we have to do is sustain it. We have to sustain it with a fuel, And in this case, this is our attention, okay? Not our imagination, not our visualization, just our equanimous, stable attention applied to what we are doing. Okay, this is what enables it to fire. Zhangbo Duan, within the alchemy classic, Understanding Reality, another very important one within alchemical traditions, stated here, those who consume even a grain of the gold elixir are changed into a phoenix flying into the pure realm of true yang. So okay, a little bit of a melodramatic description, but essentially what we're talking about is one of the later stages of alchemy, that to consume means for the body or the mind to absorb a grain of the gold elixir, the highest part of this process that is going to move into the body. And as this does this, it's going to turn us into a phoenix, if you like, flying into the pure realm of true yang. It's going to initiate the highest levels of the fire. But all of that can only happen if the mind is able to apply its attention to this process of burning the dust and initiating the fire. So going back to this idea of taking teachings from the Xingming Guizhi, let's look at this idea of Xixin Tuisang, retreat and purify the mind. Once again, back to this washing the mind to return to the hidden place. There's a quote here by Yi Jianren that says, novice practitioners abase their heart and bind it up too tightly, which inevitably leads to illnesses of distress and agitation, fire and inflammation. The heart fire of the south is temporarily concealed in the backwater of the north. Water and fire, should nurture each other, and naturally no thoughts and worries should arise. So this line here from the Xingming Guizhi again really discusses the importance of the correct mental quality, okay, to have successfully washed the mind, to clear as much of our dust off of our mind as we possibly can before we get involved in this firing process. Because as it says at the beginning, novice practitioners abase their heart and bind it up too tightly. Remember, heart and mind are intertwined. So if the mind is too stressed, it is too tight, then what's going to happen? It's going to lead to problems within your practice. So in order to relax the mind, this is why we move towards pure attention, okay, not intention. That is the opposite. You can think of intention meaning in a state of tension, intention. We don't want that, okay? We also don't use the imagination or the visualization, because this also creates a kind of tension, which, as it says here, binds the mind up too tightly. This will cause the chi to constrict and lead to the problems it discusses here, with distress and agitation. What this means is if I am too tense with my mind, or I am too focused when I practice this process, I'm not in a state of stabilized awareness, then I'm going to become distressed and agitated. Essentially, you're going to fire up your adrenals, aren't you, and move into a state of fight or flight. Then it says it will generate fire, but it's not good fire. This is negative fire here, pathological fire, which will generate inflammation. And this inflammation is the basis of the kind of sicknesses that can be formed from incorrect Nei Dan or firing process training. And I would argue Tummo practice can do exactly the same as well. So therefore people are going to get potential for migraines and heat behind the eyes. Pain in the kind of teeth and the gums is quite commonly reported. Tinnitus is quite normal as well. Panic attacks and anxiety, and perhaps mania and psychological disorders. This would be kind of this negative fire and inflammation that's generated because the heart was not washed enough, okay? The mind was not ready for the practice of Nei Dan. The next section talks about the basis of how firing process works according to metaphorical trigram theory. It says the heart fire of the south is temporarily concealed in the backwater of the north. So north and south are actually switched around. The compass is switched around in alchemy. So essentially the heart fire of the south, what it means is the south relates to the direction, the position of the heart. And it means that the fire that we need in order to burn up the qualities of the mind, okay, we need a certain fire to burn the dust off the mind. Okay, this is what we discussed so far, right? The heart fire of the south is concealed. So the fire we need to burn the dust off the mind is concealed, it's hidden. Where is it hidden? It's considered in the water of the backwater, okay, the backwater of the north. This is the energy of the kidneys and the essence. So if you remember the diagram from earlier on of the symbol for water, it was two yin lines, okay, with a yang solid line in the middle. This is the can or water trigram gua. Yeah? So we need to extract that yang line from the middle of the yin line, so the heart fire of the south can be extracted from the backwater of the north. So what this means essentially is, as we calm our mind, if we take away all the metaphors, as we calm our mind down, okay, and we bring it towards a state of being free of dust, it puts our mind in the right state to then use our practice to extract an energy from the base of the body that will start to burn through the channels to burn up the dust of the mind. That's what it's saying here. So far this passage from the Xingming Guizhi has showed us that we need to relax our mind to avoid errors in the practice, and this will enable us to draw a fire out that will burn through the channels. If we manage this, according to Yijian Ren, water and fire will nurture each other, and naturally no thoughts or worries will arise. Essentially, it will start to calm and center the mind and move you back to what we call the hidden place, or an original state. Yeah. So I wanted to highlight this because again it shows that the firing process, or the alchemical process, is not just about creating warmth so that you can melt snow on the ground or be warm when you're walking through the Himalayas or the mountains of northern China. What it's actually showing us is it is a method in order to burn away the blockages of the mind to lead us towards a more meditative state. Okay, it's a bodily process that leads towards a high level of meditation skill. The diagram I have here, or the depiction, is Hexagram 64 from the I Ching. So if you're not used to I Ching theory, don't worry too much. But if you are, this is called before completion, Hexagram 64. It's the last in the sequence. And what it shows is a symbol for water below the symbol of fire. So it's before completion because in this state, the water has not yet been, or the central line has not yet been extracted from the water to rise up through the body. So even the I Ching is showing us right at the end of the I Ching that if you still haven't extracted that yang line, or the heart fire of the south from its place within the backwater of the north, then you have not yet finished the process. It is not completed. Curiously, the completed version after completion is Hexagram 63. It's kind of like, because logically in Western minds it should be the other way around. 63 should be before completion, 64 should be completed. But in Taoism they like to reverse things and play with this idea of opposites and dichotomy and move away from logic. And I think very much they quite like the idea of getting to the end of the cycle, not quite complete, because it implies that the cycle then continues. But that's just an aside. So I wanted to highlight this line because it can show us an error and also an importance with regards to the mind to assist in the firing process. One thing I'd like to add here, actually, I think is a little bit of a tangent, is Xingming Guizhi. Let's look at the title of this text. It's the text of the principle of combining Xing and Ming. So why are these two important, Xing and Ming, like nature and life force, or nature and life path, nature and health, sometimes it's called? To me, mentality and physicality, these two mean. Really, it's because these are the two ways that the body can actually generate energy. We have a Xing, or nature, or mind way of generating energy, which is essentially the longer a person remains in a state of emptiness or shunyata, then what will happen is gradually the body will start to build energy. That is true. That is the Xing method. So the mind can generate energy by moving into a meditative state. And the other way it can generate energy or generate qi is the Ming way, the body way, essentially by training a somatic process like building the dantian or the firing process, or even increasing the efficiency of the body's function. This can build qi as well. So really we have two ways of accumulating energy, which is going to move us through into spiritual cultivation. One is with the mind, or the Xing, and one is with the body, or the Ming, nature and life path. Okay, so this is why this is important. We combine these two so that we have two sources of energy that can come together, heaven and earth combining within the system. Perhaps this section has been a little bit, or this slide has been a little bit abstract for you. I think maybe it's more relevant to people more familiar with Taoism or meditative training. So now that we've discussed how to prepare the body for this process through building the dantian, which should always happen, I should say, after a fair degree of body work, preparing the body physically. But we've looked at building the dantian, okay, this idea of building the fuel. we've looked at this idea of something needs igniting, and then we've looked at the mental process involved. You have to have a certain mental quality, okay? So once we have those ingredients in place, now we can look at what happens in the firing process. This is something called the rising of the water or rising of the steam. Sometimes you'll see those terms kind of interchange. The idea is essentially that through a particular breathing method that you will learn if you're studying the firing process or Nei Dan, which is based upon contraction, often reverse breathing, sometimes breath retention, but not always, and often control of the muscles around the perineum and the abdomen. It's a very specific process, and different traditions will have different ways, but it's a very physical process. And once you start to work with this, then you condense and cook the chi within your body until it starts to rise. And then what will happen is, as we'll discuss now, you'll extract the yang from inside the essence, and this will ignite and start this fire moving through your body. So this is the firing process proper, really. Now, as we do this, and you move through this process, we talk about 3 types of fire that can occur within the body. Okay, 3 types of fire. The first is called pathological fire. Pathological fire. So obviously pathological fire is not what we want. The name kind of gives it away. This would be an error. So we already kind of discussed this in the previous slide, that if somebody is very stressed, very uptight, using a lot of mental tension, maybe they're too forceful with their technique, or maybe they haven't built the fuel to ignite within the base of the body, so they're just kind of burning an empty fire through the system. That's very common. Then what happens is they'll produce a pathological fire. As pathological fire moves through the body, something will happen. First, you'll get hot. You'll heat up. You'll sweat more and the body will feel warm. And then you'll feel something rising very strongly through the body towards the head. So the pathological fire will produce symptoms we've already talked about, such as anxiety, panic, mood swings, insomnia. It can give you dizziness. That's quite common if there's an error. Headaches, migraines, tinnitus, anything you would associate eye pain with lots of energy rising through the body, and it's not very healthy. And sometimes people will accidentally think that this is correct for the firing process, so they'll carry on. But this is pathological fire. It simply means the body is not ready. Sometimes it can occur because you don't have enough openness within your body. You haven't done enough body conditioning to stretch the tissues and the nerves and the joints open, so you have to do a lot more work. I would argue that in Tummo practice, perhaps one of the preparatory practice might be asana or something like this, body work to stretch the joints, whereas in alchemy they might use Dao Yin training or Qigong training or whatever, or sometimes martial arts to stretch and open the spaces in the body to create enough movement, enough space for the energy to move, so that you don't get pathological fire. So pathological fire is the one we want to avoid. Hopefully you'll never get that. The second fire is called the false fire. Okay, the false fire or fake fire, false fire, is a little bit of a misleading name because we actually have to go through the false fire in order to get to the true fire. So it doesn't mean you have an error in your practice if you get the false fire. It just means there's further work to do. You're at a certain stage. So the false fire, okay, is yang qi moving through your body. What it means is that I've cooked that energy within the cauldron, within the ding. The furnace has heated it up enough that the yang qi starts to move out of the cauldron into the rest of your body. What will happen is your body will get warm, it will heat up, and it will start to feel like the heat moves like a fluid through your body. Sometimes it moves in lines, and sometimes it feels like steam, like it kind of billows and moves in spiral motions through your body. For some people, if they've got a good awareness of the subtler levels of the body, you can feel it move like a fluid or liquid. It's almost like you've got a boiler system in your body, and that water is moving through the pipes. Now the false fire, what it's doing is it's moving energy through the nerves. So it's a very somatic experience, remember. If you are feeling it, you're probably, majority of us, feeling it in our nervous system. So think of it like this. If you have a cheap electrical item, a little device or whatever it might be, it doesn't matter, whatever, hairdryer or whatever this device is, and you plug it in and the electricity goes through too much, then as it hits resistance in the circuits, it creates heat, right? It heats up. So a cheap electrical circuit will get hot. A cheap electrical device will warm up, right? That's the resistance of the electricity moving through the circuit. Now your body is no different, because as that yang qi, that electrical energy, moves through my nerves, if it hits blockages, or what we might call dust, okay, or obstructions in your nervous system, then it's going to hit resistance. So then that electrical energy is going to heat up, and it's going to warm you up. So you're warming up like a cheap hairdryer plugged into too much of an electrical supply. So at the beginning, almost all of our nervous system is blocked to a certain degree. Not necessarily to the same degree across the whole body. It might be patchy, it might not, but it's quite normal for the whole body to warm up. And that warmth will feel like it comes from the dantian area, the abdominal region, and spread through the body. Some regions will get very hot, your back, your lower abdomen, sometimes around the groin, and then that heat will move into the chest and the arms and things like this, and start to warm us up. Now, if any symptoms arise, such as headaches, nausea, dizziness, tinnitus, blah, 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 palpitations, anything like that, then we must be aware, because that means it's not the false fire, it's the pathological fire, and we must be able to differentiate between the two. The false fire does not cause negative symptoms, and it does not excite you. If you feel like you are buzzing afterwards, like you've had caffeine, that's not the false fire, that's an aspect of the pathological fire affecting your adrenals. The false fire, you can remain calm and attentive, and your awareness can remain centered and settled. You do not get excited, but the warmth moves through your nerves. Most people have difficulty differentiating between those two, but if you stick with the description I've just given you, whether you're practicing alchemy, training, Nei Dan, or I would argue possibly Tummo to a certain extent, you will be able to see which of these two fires you're generating. Now, the false fire is moving through the nerves. Now, your nerves are an extension of your mind, so your thoughts affect your nervous system, right? Which is why many of us can have unexplained mystery somatic pain within the body that is often connected to a thought or emotion or a trauma or something like this. So when we have a thought and it moves through the brain into the nerves, what will happen is it starts to generate obstruction within the nervous system, sometimes called the dust within the channels or something like this, right? So as that heat moves into the resistant area, what the false heat will start to do is it will start to burn away the dust, as they say alchemically, or free up the tension or the blockages in the nervous system. And as it does this, the nerves will relax and the resistance will go away. As the resistance goes away, the heat will die down. So in the stages of the false fire, initially you can get hot all over, then you can get patchy areas of heat, then you can get heat that comes and goes as it hits different areas of resistance, and then eventually the false fire will end. You will complete that process. This can take a while. The false fire can take, for someone who's a lay practitioner, shall we say, could take a few years, to be honest. 2 to 3 years for the false fire to move through. If you're practicing regularly, but you're not a recluse, you're not a renunciate, 2 or 3 years is not unreasonable if you're quite good at your practice. Now, as it's burning away the dust or clearing the blockages from your nerves, as we looked at in the previous slide, it's also going to be taking traumas or blockages out of your mind. So it's going to start to settle your mind as well. And here's a big difference, right? The pathological fire will excite your mind. The false fire will actually calm and center your mind. It's a very different experience between these two fires. A lot of people, in my opinion, are accidentally working with a pathological fire and exciting themselves, and they don't realize. So once the false fire, the movement of the yang qi, is completed, then you can start to get the true fire arising. Now, the true fire is very rare. Not many people manage it. And maybe some of you who practice Tummo can draw your own conclusions as to similarities here, but I will not point them out for you. I will simply state what happens in alchemy because, to be honest, my expertise lies mostly with the firing process. The true fire is not yang qi moving through the nerves. It's not electrical energy. The true fire is actually extracted from the essence. It is the, as they said in the previous couple of slides ago, wasn't it? Was it the previous slide? I think it was, yeah. It is the heart fire of the south being extracted from the backwater of the north. What they mean is extracting a spark of true yang from your essence, from your kidney energy. Now, I'm actually, to a certain extent, kind of restricted by rules of the tradition of how much I can explain here. So I can't talk too much publicly about the method, although I do share it with people in person. It's probably not something I could just sort of just willy-nilly share in the public, but I will talk about a little bit about the results or the ethos, the principles behind it. The true fire means that through your method, because there is now enough freeness within the nerves, and you start to add another technique into your training, you actually extract the true yang, chun yang, pure yang, out of your essence, and it starts to move into your body. What it feels like initially is like an electrical current around the kidneys, the perineum, sometimes around the groin. It can be like a little sharp sensation around the base of the body. And what this will do is it will start to move it through your spine up into your brain. Okay, it will move up like little electrical pulses, but it's not comfortable. Sometimes it can almost feel like a little sort of a spark off of a campfire or something touching your skin. You can see why they called it fire. It scorches you, but not horribly painful, but you'll feel it, you know, it's quite sharp. It moves up and pulses through the nerves, and when it hits your brain, up through the nervous system into the brain, then what will happen is this fire will generate what they call true water. Okay, true water. The true fire moving through the body produces true water within the brain. What the true water means is that the hormonal system essentially will start producing a lot of chemicals that will start to change the fluids in your body. One of the first places you'll notice the fluids changing will be within your saliva, which will start to change in quality and taste. It will have a slightly electrical quality to it, even a slightly static quality. And then these fluids will start to drain down through your body as you start to swallow. Okay, and they will move back down towards the dantian. Now, sometimes you will see people say, in Qigong, swish your tongue around your mouth 12 times, 24 times, whatever, then swallow your saliva. It's not true, okay? People will say this is a common Qigong practice. It is common, but it's useless. It's incorrect. It's not particularly helpful method. What these are kind of reflections of old methods from alchemical texts that people have simplified and brought through into the contemporary or modern arena and turned into a simple thing like swish your tongue around and swallow your saliva. It's not about that. The implication was from alchemy that once the true yang or true fire had been extracted from the body, a very high level technique, I will highlight that again, is it will start to generate something within your body, true water, okay, true water that goes into the saliva and the fluids that will then rain down through your body as you swallow to move down towards the dantian to start to fill it with a new substance. So there's two other terms for this process. One of them is it's the highest aspect, or it's one of the higher aspects of the microcosmic orbit, the Xiaodutian. And another name for it is its fire and water mixing. Okay, so fire and water mixing, or canonly mixing, or canonly reversing, has all these different names. What they mean by this within alchemy is you've extracted the true fire towards the brain so that it generates the true water that descends within the body. This is fire and water mixing. So it's not a visual thing, it's not an imagination thing. I'm not picturing the color red in the heart or blue in the kidneys or anything like this. I am actually taking the body via the firing process through a very clear somatic process combined with stabilized awareness over a long period of time. Okay, it takes many, many years of practice regularly to achieve this, and then it actually starts to transform the body electrically, energetically, and chemically. This is all going on at the same time as the burning of the debris and the dust from the channel system. And this is essentially what the firing process is doing. And as it takes you through this process to transform you physically, energetically, chemically, it prepares you and builds the foundation for the more subtle levels of alchemical training. Now, you can see from this that I believe that it's easy to see here that these are some quite actually high-level techniques we're talking about. They're not something that can be done in 10 minutes, and they're not something that can be done on the first time you do it. The microcosmic orbit is not something you can start your process with or do very quickly. Fire and water mixing is not something beginners can do, definitely not. We have to go through this whole process of burning the false fire through the body after we've accumulated enough qi and mobilized it in order to get the body prepared, that we're ready to then learn the technique to extract the true fire, to generate the true water, to make the alchemical process work for us. If I had more time, I would go into it, but it's already turned into a long talk. But the diagram on the right with the dragon and the tiger and the trigrams of fire, water, heaven and earth are metaphorical discussions of this process. I just wanted to highlight that you'll see this kind of hidden imagery within alchemical texts that are discussing the same thing. I would say for someone that wants a written version of this process, I prefer the charts, like in the Nei Dan too, but maybe that's just because I'm a pictorial person. So for our final slide, the final part of this discussion or this talk, I just want to kind of depart a little bit from the firing process, skip several stages if you like, and just kind of go to one of the final stages of the Nei Dan process, just to put it into the wider context of why we're trying to do this, or why the Taoists were originally trying to do this, the alchemists. So again, I want to highlight that I've skipped several stages here. Just look at the sort of far end of the training. On the left, you have another diagram from Lukang Temple, or in fact, it's the same diagram I had at the beginning, isn't it? And you can see the Power practitioner has their spirit rising out of their head. And on the right, you have a diagram from a Taoist classic showing a very similar thing with a gentleman meditating on an animal skin there, isn't he? With a version of his spirit rising up out of the top of the head, okay? So I would say that there's definitely shared iconography there. Sometimes people, when they discuss Nei Dan or alchemy, especially charts like this, they think they're kind of overly metaphorical for consciousness processes. So they say, oh, the red child in this case, or the immortal fetus is a symbol for the enlightened state, as if they're talking about sort of Buddhist meditation or something like this. But that's not actually the case. Within alchemy, they're talking about something quite tangible, something quite esoteric, a little bit different from just a state of mind, okay? They're talking about the same as I think that many Hindu or Vajrayana practitioners have talked about actually sending their spirit out of the body, as if they want to project it into another realm of existence, okay? Spiritual immortality. So here within the Lao Tzu Zhongjing, the classic of the central classic of Lao Tzu, which is a 3rd century text, we have this description of what they call the red child. It says the red child, or he, resides precisely in the ducts of the stomach and the great granary. He sits facing due south on a couch of pearls and jade, and a flowery canopy of yellow clouds covers him. He wears clothes with pearls of 5 hues. He sits facing due south, feeding on the yellow essence and the red breath, drinking and ingesting in the Fount of Nectar. So these lines, when you first read them, can sound poetic and maybe overly metaphorical, and people can't follow them, but we can actually sort of break them down a little bit and see if we can understand them. So it says initially, he resides, the red child, resides precisely in the ducts of the stomach and the great granary. Now the stomach is not literal, because we're talking about the way that it was viewed in ancient Chinese or alchemical concepts. Now, funnily enough, and this will confuse Chinese medicine people listen to this, is when we talk about the stomach or indeed the spleen, what we actually mean is the yellow court, or the solar plexus, you might call it, the central region, the earth region of the body, the middle of the body. And this is the great granary. There's a point in acupuncture called Zhongwan here, meaning central granary, that sits right in the middle of the torso. And this is actually within alchemy what they mean when they say the stomach or the great granary. It's like an energetic stomach rather than the physical sac of the stomach. Sits around Ren 12, if you know where that point is. So the red child, or the potential for the immortal spirit, sits here in the center of the body. He sits facing due south, meaning essentially due south. South corresponds to the fire and the heart. So it means that that essentially he's generated from the energy of the mind, okay? He sits on a couch of pearls and jade. Pearls and jade were considered spiritual substances. So essentially by sitting facing due south on a couch of pearls and jade, what it is indicating is the potential for the red child is developed when the mind, okay, is moved into a higher or more elevated spiritual state. Okay, so what they're talking about here is that within the center of the body, when the Xing, or the nature, is perfected, then you have the potential to encounter the red child. He has a flowery canopy of yellow clouds covering him. The yellow clouds above him indicate essentially that he is fed with qi. Okay, a flowery canopy often indicates the lungs, so essentially we have to breathe and descend the qi down to the center of the body once the spirit is in an elevated state in order to feed this red child. He wears clothes with pearls of 5 hues, essentially representing the 5 colors, or the 5 elements, sorry. Pearls indicates in a spiritual state, so when the 5 elements are in their higher state and combined, then this will also feed this red child. So far, let's take away the metaphorical language. What this line is saying is you have the potential for an immortal spirit sat within the center of the body, center of the torso, okay? You can encounter it when your mind moves through into an elevated spiritual state. We feed it with the qi of our breath from above, and we strengthen it by bringing together the energy of the 5 elements. Next section. He sits facing due south, as we've already said, feeding on the yellow essence and the red breath. So the yellow essence means essentially the qi, once again, connected to the element of earth, and the red breath, okay? Essentially this is the elevated quality of the qi, okay, moving down into this area. And this is the important bit. He drinks and ingests the fount of nectar. So the most important sustenance for the red child is the fount of nectar. Essentially what they're discussing is the true water. So once we have the meditative state, okay, and we've descended our breath and sent our qi through to this area, we then have to generate the true water, okay, what they call the fount of nectar, by producing this chemical within the body that rains down through the fluids. And as we start carrying on with this process through the act of mixing fire and water, then what will start to happen is that you will feed an aspect of your spirit that then at later stages of training can be supposedly, theoretically, expelled from your body to continue as a spiritual immortal. Now again, I've missed several stages out, but I just wanted to end that presentation by putting the firing process into the wider context of spiritual practice, so that we weren't stuck at the level of thinking that it was just about health or developing heat so that you can stay warm or something like this. Okay, it's something much, much deeper. It's about a very high level spiritual process. So thank you very much for listening to my talk. I just want to finish once again by reiterating the fact that I'm primarily an alchemist, a Nei Dan practitioner, not a Tummo practitioner, although I have practiced Tummo in the past, and I do have some experience of it. Definitely my expertise lies more with alchemy. So I would say that any comparisons you may draw may be your own, okay? Some of which I've highlighted my own opinions through this talk, but again this talk was really primarily aimed at Tummo practitioners at a Vajrayana conference in Bhutan. They were already familiar with their own ideas of what the tantric Tummo process was, so I was simply overlaying the process and the theory of Nei Dan on top of what they already understood, and I allowed them to draw their own conclusions and their own differences. After the talk, it was actually very well received. Many of the Vajrayana practitioners, a mixture of Westerners that were there to talk or listen to the conference, as well as Lamas from Bhutan and other parts of Asia, were happy with the talk and excited to learn more. And I had a lot of people asking me about alchemy and the alchemy process. And that was really what I was aiming to do, just introduce the alchemy process and show perhaps where there were some parallels. But I should reiterate once again, like I said at the start of the talk, I'm not a fan of mixing methods. I do not believe that 2 methods that have some similarities are better than one. I don't think that is the case. Sometimes methods can clash, because although there may be crossovers in some of the functioning between Tummo and Nei Dan, my personal conclusion is the methods themselves are different. The mechanics of the methods are different. So therefore, if someone has access to either one of these processes that is efficient and correctly taught and authentic, then that should be what they focus upon. I should also reiterate that both the firing process and Tummo, in my opinion, are quite dangerous practices potentially if people haven't done the preparatory work in both their mind and their body, so they are ready for this practice. And I want to make that clear, because I don't want to encourage people to start trying these methods unless they are ready for them, because that pathological heat can be a real bastard if you start to develop that. So, thank you.